Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast where the team members from That Nerdy Site get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me for the first time in a while on this podcast, Logan Wilkinson is back. How you doing, Logan?
I- I'm doing good. It's been a interesting day.
Yeah, interesting day indeed. I don't know if you want to briefly run through that story before we dive into the meat of the podcast.
Yeah, I was at an archery range that a buddy had invited me over to. It went great. I got a little shot in the center, which is fun for my first ever time. And I was doing it offhanded too because he didn't have a lefty bow. Because I forgot to mention that somehow he didn't know I talked about it a lot. Um, but got one in the center offhanded. But then as we were leaving, yes, someone shot themselves in the hand slash had an arrow explode in their hand basically, and so we were delayed for a while leaving as ambulances came, and he had to try to figure all this out, and it was a whole kerfuffle, but nonetheless it was fun otherwise.
Yeah.
For first time.
I meant to mention it before, but it slipped my mind. But when you mentioned that before we started recording, I immediately had these repressed flashbacks to I used to work as in a scene shop, like building sets and stuff for theater for many years, and in particular when I did it with the Santa Fe Opera as like part of their apprentice program. I remember somebody who was working, like I worked on the set side of things, but somebody who was working on the prop side of things basically had a terrible injury involving a couple fingers using like the belt sander and basically like getting caught in the belt sander and basically losing like the tips of a couple fingers
Oh,
and just being out for the I think she was still around for the rest of the summer and they just found other projects for her to work on, and so shout out to her just like working through that. But yeah, it's like there's definitely days where I'm like, oh man, like it's amazing the things that like as a college student they just let me like be in charge of
dude,
with other students and
yeah,
do
yeah, crazy.
like
I
it's
think of that even for
we're
just like
lucky that
high
yeah.
school shop class, even
Yeah,
with like crazy things they let us do with those.
yeah, absolutely. Like I remember even before that, I remember like growing up, one of like my Sunday school teachers um was a carpenter by trade, and like after like he was gone for a couple weeks at one point, and I remember like there kind of being like a, oh, like where's he at, what happened to him, and he came back and like yeah, he basically had a couple nubs because he'd been using a circular saw and just like cut right through a couple fingers, and I was like, oh god.
Mm,
That like the shock that you go through when something like that happens is probably
right.
severe and
Yeah.
surreal. And so yeah, hearing the like a bolt went through his hand or something, it was like, oh, I just suddenly start having
Yeah.
all of his hand trauma come back. So
Yeah.
I'll try and throw like a little a content warning, I guess, at the top of this episode of like,
Yeah.
hey, heads up, we briefly discussed this before diving into the meat of our topic today, which is going to
Yes.
be Everything Everywhere All at Once. This is a movie I talked about, I think, briefly on the podcast a couple months ago, back when I'd seen it in theaters, and Logan finally saw it a few weeks ago now. Also, you
Mhm.
still also saw it in theater, even though I think by that
Mhm.
point it may have already been out on video and whatnot.
I believe so.
Um,
Yeah.
and then I just rewatched it myself this weekend, so figured it would be a fun little episode to dive into and do kind of like our impressions and then like a spoiler cast thoughts. And then if we have time, you also may have some impressions and thoughts of RRR that we will throw in into the episode as well.
Mhm.
So keep an eye out for any timestamps for any of that related stuff. Before we hop into that, though, a little bit of housekeeping. Friday Night Dying Light is winding down to an end. We have an end date. We have I think probably. I mean, it's still probably like a couple months away at this point, but Cameron has finished recording
Finished filming.
Friday Night Dying Light. And yeah, I think he still has about 7 or 8 episodes to go from where we're at. So you can go catch that series while it's continuing on every Friday evening at 6 p.m. Pacific time as Cameron continues his playthrough of Dying Light 2. Um, So yeah, go check that out. And lastly, if you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. So diving in, yeah, let's talk spoiler free first for anybody who hasn't watched the film yet. Logan, what did you think of Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Yeah, it's an a lot movie, right?
It's almost like it's
I think
everything,
the
everywhere, all at
everywhere all
once.
at once. I think the kind of descriptor I gave for you when I first talked about it with you is watching it within the first like 30 or so minutes. I was like, I don't know if I love some of the things they're doing. I don't know if I like this beat or this, plot element. And then they're just like at a certain point in time, they're like, it just becomes a point where you just like sink into the film and like you just can't even think of anything. You can't even think of thinking of the movie. You're just like in it and just kind of watching it almost. Um, and that's sort of how it felt. And then all of a sudden we were just like in the end, and it is just I think phenomenal piece of art. I think it easily forms kind of this weird trio of films of Everything Everywhere All at Once, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and RR are my three favorite movies so far this year. And I kind of love that I wouldn't have pegged any of those to be my top three, a little over halfway through 2022, but I love so much that they are because they define this kind of weird year for movies. And the exciting different ways they're going about telling their stories. And I think everything everywhere all at once in particular, it's just such a singularly unique film, right? Like there's just nothing else like it that you will have seen. um I think if you've gone to the movies in your life.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember I remember walking into it not really knowing a ton about it. It was one of those, and these are always such a joy, just because I feel like so much of what I see is like I'm seeing a movie that I've seen trailers for hundreds of times or whatever, and like Peanut Butter Falcon was the last one I saw like this, where
Mm.
like I hadn't even seen the trailer going into the movie. I was just going in based off of like people's recommendations, and like the buzz on this movie was really good coming out of it, in like when it was in limited release and stuff. And then so and it was one of those that never made it to our formerly Alamo, now Majestic, and so it was like I had to go to one of the bigger chains even to just see it, which is fine, but it's definitely like an experience I immediately also often am like, I'm so glad I don't see movies this way anymore because like just the audience is just different, and they have
Mm.
no qualms about talking to each other loudly and openly during a movie or stuff like that. I'm just like we're here for a reason to see what they're talking about, not what you're talking about. Shut up. Um Unfortunately, like there wasn't a ton of that going on, but it was definitely like there was enough of it in the lead into the movie. I was like, oh God, I'm going to want to smack these people. Um and I remember just like in that like ignorance of not even really like knowing that the movie is like about a multiverse. It was basically like the gist I had of it.
Elevator pitch, right?
Yeah, and I love even the like the IMDb tagline even more so, which is basically like this movie is about a woman trying to do her taxes, or a woman tries to do her taxes, and
That's
it's
good.
just like
That's
uh
good.
which also appropriate description for the movie.
Right.
um and so yeah, I like going in and not really knowing what to expect and just being along for the ride that first time was like such a like all over the place, everything kind of flying at you. And then in the same vein, like you talked about, like, they're throwing so many ideas at you that like it's almost overwhelming at first, but then as the
Yeah.
movie continues and those ideas start to like build on top of each other and stack and stack and stack, and tie more like like it's we go to like five different multiverses or something, and you're like, how could any of these be like connected or whatever, but then they start really like finding threads that like tie them together, or the like these beats and stuff, and just thematic ideas, and it's such a masterful like jigsaw puzzle that is just being built as you go through this movie, and by the end you see like the full picture. It's a puzzle that was built with you never having seen the box or something like that,
Mhm.
and when it's all said and done, you're like, this is an amazing piece.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had so much fun with it, and then like even now going back and like rewatching it, knowing where it's all going, it's still fun to like see just how much they plant seeds throughout the movie of ideas just here and there, that are going to pay off by the movie's end. And on a first pass, it's just, maybe an offhanded comment or a thing in the background of a shot or something, and you don't necessarily know, or even like a lot, like even characters. It's like seeing how characters weave through the story and through the different multiverses,
Mhm.
and like come and go is a fun just element that I had most recently. This last time I was like, oh, it's that person from this other multiverse that's now in the in this part of the story. I hadn't caught that before. That's really cool. um so yeah, I love it. It was very much, I saw right before we started recording today, uh a tweet going around, basically, that was basically somebody tweeting to the effect of like, y'all went and overhyped everything everywhere all at once. And basically somebody had quote tweeted it, as many people had quote tweeted this person. They'd quote tweeted basically a snapshot of a letterbox review that was effectively 5 stars. Go see this before everybody on Twitter starts telling you it's overrated. And so it was just like a self-fulfilling prophecy element.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm of the mindset, yeah, this is probably my favorite movie of the year. And while I also very much liked the Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent,
Oh
I,
yeah.
I very much liked it for like different reasons.
Yes. Very different
Um,
movies.
yeah, and while I've not seen RRR, I've seen like enough like clips, and I've heard people talk about RRR enough, that I'm like, okay, that might be the first like Bollywood-esque movie to grab me, because I've never really fallen into that genre. And especially off the heels of like Miss Marvel and stuff like that. It's like Southeast Asian cinema and ideas and filmmaking is an interesting element to me.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely like a possibility of being in there in the contender. It's also just sometimes nice, when so much of the movies that are out, especially as we continue to climb out of this pandemic, like so many of the big movies are just the big blockbuster franchise movies. It is like exciting and fun to see like kind of original standalone ideas.
3, yeah, exactly.
I'm not a fan of horror or anything like that, but like Nope being,
Nope. Yeah.
another
Another
a
movie I
new,
just recently saw, yeah.
yeah, new Jordan Peele movie, kind of, and one of the, I think I was seeing a thing that's basically like it is one of the highest grossing original movies this year. Like it had
I'm
like the
sure.
highest grossing like opening weekend for an original movie. Um because yeah, so much of what we see is based on other ideas or franchises or long dormant sequels. Like that's one I guess I probably still need to see this year to like really have like a concrete opinion on it, would be Top Gun Maverick, just because of
I
how
also haven't seen
much,
Top Gun Maverick, which is crazy for
yeah,
me.
like how much people are like really hyping that up and saying like, oh my
Mhm.
god, it's amazing. Like I have no connection to the original Top Gun even. So I would definitely need to like watch that first, I think, to find an appreciation for Top Gun Maverick. But like my folks went and saw it and they really enjoyed it. So so like
Yeah.
cool. But yes, of the things that have come out this year, Everything Everywhere All at Once is great.
Mhm.
Michelle Yeoh,
Agreed.
especially, we talked about this a little bit at the time. Seeing Michelle Yeoh in this right around the time we did, was it Tomorrow
Tomorrow Never
Tomorrow Never
Dies.
Dies,
Absolutely.
and having this like completely repressed, like, oh, I had forgotten Michelle Yeoh is the like effectively the Bond girl in that movie.
Mhm.
Um and has been doing this and kicking ass for many many years. Was so like, it was such a great like 1-2 punch, because
Mhm.
she's phenomenal in this. Ki Hui Kwan, like having a like tour de force return to acting after his breakout in the 80s with Indiana Jones and Goonies, and then leaving because there
For
wasn't
like 20
much
years.
work
Yeah.
for Asian American actors, or Asian descent actors, I guess. Um, And so yeah, him being inspired by Crazy Rich Asians a few years ago to like get back into this and seeing himself on the screen, like I've loved like catching some of his interviews and stuff like that since this, because
Mhm.
yeah, he comes in and just knocks this out of the park. Kelly Sue, I believe is the actress's name, also phenomenal in here. Stephanie Sue, sorry, um, as Joy. And then Jamie Lee Curtis is just also a joy anytime she's on the screen in a fun supporting role in this one. It's yeah, like everybody showed up to play,
James
and
Hong as well
James
as
Hong as
director.
well. I mean the Daniels as the directors, Dan
Hmm.
Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, are like I've not I guess I had seen because they have like one music video that was kind of like their breakout. I don't remember which it is, but like if you Google the Daniels music video, I'm sure it'll come up.
Funny.
Like I remember seeing that after they'd come this, and I was like, oh, I can totally see how that music video aesthetic translates into this movie. But I don't think I'd seen much of their work other than that, and they're just like on a visual storytelling level, a lot of fun. Um,
The music video was Turned Down for What
yeah, there
by
you go.
DJ Snake.
Yeah. Yeah, that it yeah, with, like, crashing through, like, rooms
Yep.
and buildings and, yeah, all sorts of stuff
Mhm.
like that. Yeah, it's just there's a lot of fun to be had in this movie, while also telling an incredibly heartfelt story, telling an incredible immigrant story, um, and yeah, just really, really fun sci-fi as well.
Mhm.
There were elements this time where I was watching it where I found myself thinking, you know what, like it's really cool when we get like sci-fi movies in recent years that are outside of the like MCUification spectrum and stuff like that. Like another one I was thinking about recently is Palm Springs from a couple years ago. That's
Mm,
basically
mhm.
like a Groundhog's Day rom com.
Andy Samberg. Yeah.
Yeah, with Andy Samberg and Christina Milan Kristen Milani, I think. She was the mother in How I Met Your Mother.
Yep.
But yeah, that was another one to just like uh and J.K. Simmons is also in that one. And yeah, when they just kind of like have a fun sci-fi idea, but then tell like an incredibly endearing story with throwing wonderful actors at it. It's just a lot of fun. So yeah, highly recommend. Ton of fun, great performances, great action as well. That's another element of it that like I think is probably something that you probably expect, or I guess not necessarily expect because like Crazy Rich Asians doesn't have like combat and stuff like that. But like with
Right.
Michelle Yeoh's lineage and stuff, there's a lot of fun action to be had in this, and a lot of creative action as well. Just in the way of like how they incorporate different multiversal aspects and ideas and stuff like that.
And
So
abilities,
yeah,
right.
yeah. So cool. Then yeah, I think we can wrap up our spoiler free thoughts there, unless you have
Mhm.
anything, any last things to jump into. But yeah, we can dive into spoiler filled territory. So
Let's do it.
last chance to duck out. Again, if we end up getting to RRR and you're interested in that, look at the timestamps on the episode and they'll be down there. But yes, spoiler filled stuff. Logan, I don't even necessarily know where, because like it is a movie that can be spoiled, but it's also a movie that like it's
It's
not
hard to spoil.
it's not even it's not that it's hard to spoil. It's just like it's not a spoilery movie in the way that like an MCU movie is like, oh, did you see this person coming or something like that, or like the cameos and the plot beats and stuff like that. This
Or the
is
spread
like
scene.
it's definitely it can be a spoilery thing, but it's a just a weird like I don't necessarily know even like what spoiler I would want to talk about first or anything like that. So I will throw to you if you have any ideas specifically that you want to dive into and discuss.
I think it's uh, it's such a weird movie, like you said, to even like know where to begin at almost at times. Right, like I think, I mean, let's just go right to the ending, I guess. Right, like I love the fact that this ending for Everything Everywhere All at Once almost saw like Return of the Jedi the week before and be like, they did like three different endings and like planes of action at once. Let's do that times, fill in the blank kind of thing. And like them giving us like five or six in different like Indians kind of simultaneously is such a brilliant idea.
Hmm.
I think low key one of the most brilliant and powerful and beautiful elements of the movie is the fact that it is a movie where you don't fight to win, right? Like the fact that it is ultimately about like accepting people and like loving them for who they are. That is like kind of like the secret that like opens up her allowing to, you know, get to her daughter in time and get past all the kind of enemies in kind of that main um multiverse set in. And I think it is one of the funniest and heartfelt sequences I've seen in a movie in a really long time.
Hmm.
Um, and really, like, I think, you know, this husband, wife, and daughter story is really well executed in kind of all of their relationships. And I think that is something that is way harder than it sounds.
Hmm.
Because I think if any one of those didn't work, it would kind of cause everything to go off balance. But they all strike all the right notes across all the different kind of portrayals of their characters they're doing too. And I think it is just it is just a like confetti cannon of an ending in terms of how much stuff is happening. And yeah, I think it is exactly what I would want a movie like this ending to be without possibly realizing this is what I wanted. And I think the level of like somberness and kind of understatedness and bombast and beauty and comedy and like melancholy ness I think it goes for it. Like obviously the scene of Michelle Yeoh and her husband kind of in one of their timelines where they didn't end up together and they're
Hmm.
each kind of rich and successful and famous. And you know I think the pain that each of them feel in that scene is incredible, and Twitter loved it, and rightfully so. And
Yeah.
I think it is just a phenomenal ending. I think in terms of how it just lands all the different things it's trying to do.
Yeah, that the iconic from this film line of I think in another universe I would have really enjoyed just like owning a laundromat and doing taxes with you or something,
Yeah.
something to that effect is a really good line. But and admittedly one of my also favorite lines of this movie. But even on a rewatch, like in the lead up to that line of that scene, Ki Hoi Kwan's Wayland's character is talking about that the kindness that he exudes, which we see in multiple universes, is not out of a naivete, or
Mhm.
if it is, it may have started out of a naivete, but like this version of Wayland also recognizes that it's a survival technique and that is how
Really
he
beautiful too.
fights. And so very much, yeah, it is like we get this progression over the course of the film of um uh uh Evelyn's character fighting and learning to fight her way, then dipping into that like macabre cynicism that has overtaken Joy's character and Jobu Tupaki,
Mhm.
and she kind of falls into that and like is destroying the laundromat in one, or she's like breaking up with Hot Dog's Fingers Jamie Lee Curtis in another, and just kind of like she is like nothing matters, everything's pointless. But then they have this conversation, and she kind of comes out of that. Oh, she's also stabbed Wayland in one of the universes in that kind of like, yeah, prime universe. She stabbed him with like broken glass or whatever. Um, but in that conversation, she like kind of takes from him fighting with kindness and kind of his whole mantra of like we need to be kind to each other. I don't know where it stopped, but we need to be kind, which is obviously, a much larger message for just today in general,
Right.
in the times we live in. But yeah, like, and that being symbolized so much by like the googly eyes, as
Yeah.
Evelyn gets, a barrage of bullets, but then uses these powers to turn them into
Like
googly
Matrix.
eyes. Yeah, Matrix infused googly eyes. The Rock turns around and has googly eyes and I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna like we just see that text is great, and then yeah, like the we've already had so many fun like combat like fight sequences and stuff throughout the film,
Mhm.
and now we get like a new variation at the end of that, but more as a defense, just so she can get them in position to have like a couple of them like pair off and get married. She can spray the perfume in the guy who, is in the laundromat, and that gives him his joy.
His
And
smell of his older wife,
yeah,
right?
he can see the guy who's like the office guy, who's basically like a likes being a submissive person,
Mhm.
who is one of the directors. That is one of the Daniels, which I did not know until I was watching some of the behind the
I didn't know
scenes
either. That's great. Yeah.
featurettes. Yeah, um, and then the one that I alluded to earlier that I didn't catch the first time around, but like especially because it's not like we don't see this moment. It's more like we see the aftermath after she's kind of like pacified all of these people. One of the people there is her like kung fu master from the other universes.
Mhm.
And like her piece of joy that Evelyn gives her in that sequence is a cookie. And in her other sequences, she's like, kung fu is about this cookie can be a kung fu. And then like later it's, even a pinky can be kung fu kind of thing. And so she like to see that, oh, she made her way into this universe, because they do such just a great job of like everybody in all of these scenes like you're seeing in other universes intertwining with these characters and stuff. And so yeah, just seeing like her and being like, oh, it's her, it's that character who is like her kung fu master in the universe where Evelyn is this like kung fu superstar, actress galore, glamorous actress galore kind of thing. But that kung fu master is always on like, you need to focus, you can't let
Mhm.
distractions bother you. Just seeing like her pop up was just a fun little like, oh, that's a really cool way for that beat to like also tie back into all this. And yeah, all of it in in the quest to save Joy from just giving herself over to the everything bagel of everything. um was it, with the like final boss being Mecha Gong Gong, the
Mhm.
the James Hong character, who just like every time like he reappears, I love that his like triggers to like get whatever abilities he needs are just like constantly throwing more and more like equipment from this office building into weird contraption forms. Like the first time we see him come in, it is like he has souped up his wheelchair with all sorts of stuff, and that's how he was able to get overpowered into this universe. And then yeah, he's like walking with all of the like computer equipment attached to him. A very fun visual in and of itself, but then it also leads into that heartbreaking like the it is very much we are in the like, I guess like the 2020s in cinema seem to be like the era of dealing with like family trauma
Yeah.
and the lineage of family trauma, because we've had stuff like Turning Red or Encanto and Everything Everywhere All at Once, where um Evelyn has this realization that like she has taken the sins of her father and passed them on to her daughter, and
Mhm.
like is trying to come to terms with that, um in very beautiful and heartbreaking ways. um and then yeah, it's like the whole village comes together to save Joy.
Right.
And even then we get that like scene out in the parking lot of the laundromat
Yep.
where Joy's like, I'm glad that you're figuring your stuff out, but I'm still really fucked up and it really hurts. And
Mhm.
it's like, okay, then let's like work through that. Let's figure that
Yeah.
out. Let's like, I would rather work through that with you than you be gone.
Mhm.
Is a lovely, beautiful sentiment. And yeah, just a lovely like relationship that yeah, again, like the trio, especially of the mom, dad, and daughter
Yeah.
of this, and how they are all hurting in their ways and trying to, over the course of the film, heal from one another or help each other heal, is really lovely stuff.
I think that one of the elements that I really appreciate about Everything Everywhere All at Once is the idea of, the sins of the father is not a new idea. It's biblical, in fact. And I think an element of this really appreciate that Turning Red also did, and in Contour as well. They all kind of, I think, these new 2020 kind of movies is that instead of it being about a father and a son or a father and daughter, even it's a mother and a daughter's relationship, or a grandmother and kind of granddaughter in Kanto's case. And seeing it from that angle, I think, is so a refreshing and important and necessary, but b, I think allows for a better reflection of like what today's families look like, right? Like
You-
Evelyn is the one who is like the primary breadwinner, right? And her husband is more of like kind of the, I think, classical kind of stay-at-home husband and father, who's kind of the goofy silly one, and she's kind of the stern taskmaster. And what that does to Joy's relationship with both, and the presence of like Gong Gong, right, and her grandfather, and like everything involved in it is so well constructed and put together and real. And you know I think the idea of familial trauma and familial legacies in positive and negative ways, and what we carry forward from our parents onto ourselves, and what we then kind of impart onto not just our children, but I think what this movie does, that Turn in Red or Encanto, or a lot of kind of
Miss
Sins of
Marvel
the Father,
was another example I was going to pull, and not
right?
necessarily Sins of the Father as much, but like there is relationships that are explored
Right.
down the maternal generations.
And one of the elements I like of this movie is that, in exploring that kind of idea of like sins of the father and familiar trauma, is that it doesn't just do it across generations, but it shows the effects of that on a marriage as well, which I think the other ones, but kind of by the nature of the stories, don't. But this one I think does, and it shows that it's not just you know the kids or grandkids that are affected; it's people that you're married to, that you want to spend your life with, that are kind of this corrosive nature of these kind of traumas can inflict on that as well, right? And I think Evelyn's worries for 20 plus years of whether or not she made the right decision in leaving home to go marry, her husband, and then seeing what their life became, right? And I think one of the most striking moments for me was when she got that glimpse of herself as, a glamorous, incredible movie star who is single and wanted that life, right? And throughout the film, there's this sort of dynamic of, you know, the husband possibly wanting to get a divorce because of everything that's happened in their relationship, and just how kind of devoid of a relationship it really is at this point. It's almost more of a business partnership. And Evelyn kind of similarly seen what her life could be like, and almost wanted, not even almost wanted that, right?
Hmm.
And having to go on this journey together to, I think, remember what brought them together, and remember what made them kind of fall in love, and seeing those those small sparks throughout things. And then obviously kind of the first kind of sign of intimacy we've seen between them, at the very end of the movie when they're back at the IRS office again. I really, really enjoyed this movie's handling of their relationship, and kind of the trauma of their family's past, and how it's affected them in kind of the present day as well.
Yeah, I think it's very much like almost the ultimate like what if kind of movie, because it
Mhm.
like it very much quite literally gives you like, here's the branching path,
Multiple options, yeah.
here's the different ways that your life has could have gone that led down to this path or whatever. And it's also a grass is always greener, because like that
Mhm.
first glimpse she
Mhm.
gets of like superstardom and stuff, she comes back and I like, no, I need to tell Waylon this. I need to show him how much better my life would have been if we'd never if I hadn't run off with him, which is like just a heartbreaking sentiment,
Yeah,
and the lack of self-awareness to realize how
exactly.
heartless that would be to tell a person of like, look how much better my life would be if
Without you in
you and
it.
I never got
Yeah.
married. But it's also like she comes around by the end of the film and realizes in that universe, she longs for, what might have been if they had, like she has fame and stuff, but another part of her life is empty, and there is a void, as a result. And let alone, obviously in that universe there's no joy. She doesn't have like quite literally there's no joy. She doesn't have a daughter
Mhm.
to love and cherish in that universe. And so I think like that's one of those elements of like the way that that story, you know is introduced as like, how look how much better things could be for her, if life had gone a different way, but then still like that realization of like, oh, maybe the Evelyn that like we are with in our kind of prime timeline thing is the best of all Evelyns, the best possible Evelyn,
Right.
because she has, like she doesn't have the fame and fortune or whatever, but she still has like the people who matter the most to her. Um, and the accessibility to now get to all of those other ones
Mhm.
now that her eyes have been open to that. But yeah, it's the thing. I'll find myself occasionally, as I'm driving or something, I'll just have like a thought of, I'll have one of those like, or shower thoughts of like, what if I had done this different thing years ago, like where would my life be, what would, and then I'm like, well, in a multiverse of infinite possibilities like this one, there is a version of me that did go down that path, and I can just kind of like have this like momentary glimpse into like their life and just be like, good on them, or I hope they're doing well, or whatever it might be. And so like ultimately, while there are elements of the movie that do kind of like straddle this line of like like sadness and dour and cynicism,
Mhm.
and the idea that like,
Nihilism,
yeah,
right?
very
It's
very
a
much
pervasive
nihilism,
theme.
that like none of this matters because all we have are like a fleeting few, seconds with one another in the grand scheme of the universe. It's like, yeah, but even even though I only have a few fleeting, seconds, there's also an infinite versions of me that also have a fleeting few seconds, and hopefully we're all doing something with those few seconds.
Right.
Um, in so yeah, it was like it ends up being this like weird little uplifting, and also as kind of Evelyn, says by the end, like, then I'm going to cherish those as much as I can. I'm going to cherish those few seconds that we have together. um because yeah, as we are all too often reminded, like life can be incredibly short.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we got to make the most of the time we have, because who knows what comes next.
I think, a movie comparison that I hadn't thought of until hearing you talk about it a little bit too is with the grass is always greener element is It's a Wonderful Life, right?
Mhm.
And I think kind of that classic cosmic story of like, you know, what if I done this differently, or what if I just never existed, right? And the world would be better without me, kind of thing. And that idea and getting to kind of see what another vision of kind of history or this case of the universe could look like, I think is all over this film. And I think one of the most powerful elements of this movie is how it understands that, you know, it is not necessarily the amount of time you have with someone. It is how you use that time and how you value that time and how you treasure the time you do have. Because whether you have, like you said, 5 minutes or, 500 years, right? Like it only really matters who you spent that with, right? And what you did with that time. And that's all over this movie. And I think Evelyn's story is particularly poignant in that, particularly poignant in her journey to understand that, and her journey to understand the ways in which her husband and daughter, and even her father to a degree, right, have brought her some measure of joy and happiness and helped kind of mold her into who she is, and also can inspire her to keep growing and being a better version of herself. And I think the arc she goes on in this film is a incredibly like it is just a like cathartic moment that I think she, by the end of this movie, she just, I feel like, has just drained everything out of her, and kind of been filled up again by kind of this experience, and literally staring into a bagel of nothingness, and this almost black hole kind of object, and seeing kind of maybe how, you know nothing lasts forever. And so what's the point of anything? What's the point of any relationship or bond or connection or moment or emotion, even, right? The way that kind of joy speaks to this kind of pervasive, all encompassing like nihilism. And Evelyn's response of just like, well, it's because you know, we make the moments matter, right? We make our time together matter. Um, and I just think it's really incredibly beautiful, and it is one of those films that you just sort of sit like gobsmacked at by the end, and it is easily one of the most, I think, emotionally powerful films I've seen in a while. In a weird way, the film I can kind of almost best equate it to in terms of like the emotional, I feel like, impact it had while seen in a theater was when I watched the Mr. Rogers documentary
Mm,
a couple years ago in theaters. And just like the emotional effect I feel like that had on people around us,
mhm.
right? And especially getting to like see, I'm obviously not a mother or a daughter, but getting to like watch the movie with Travia, right? And especially for her as like the daughter of like immigrants, and that obviously being an essential element of this story is kind of that dynamic between Evelyn and Joy, and seeing the way that hit her and seeing kind of the impact of that, and seeing, I think probably the first like on-screen portrayal of like, immigrant familial trauma in a like Hollywood film and displayed in front of her, to say nothing of like Asian familial trauma on a big screen, had like a hugely profound emotional effect on her. And so I think there's also just that element of this movie as well, in terms of like it's just on screen portrayal of people who typically aren't the stars of films, right? The way what it does for like representation of, people and communities who don't routinely get these opportunities, right? That's the whole reason, right, that, you know, one of the three core actors of the movie left acting for 20 years, right? Is because of this, and see them be kind of front and center and own it, and every single one of them deliver a just knockout performance. Like all three of them just absolutely crushed it. I think it helps just elevate it that much more, and make it that much more of a special and like impactful film.
Yeah, and it's also wildly funny, and it definitely
We haven't even talked about that really, but yeah,
yeah,
it's
it
hilarious.
can definitely do that thing where it's throwing a lot of funny things at the wall at you. But I mean, like, obviously, one of my favorites that you and I have talked about a little bit
Yeah,
outside of this is like the setup of the Rakakuni
yeah,
bit, and everybody just kind of thinking it's a weird, like, you mean Ratatouille? You mean the Pixar movie Ratatouille? um, why have you suddenly thrown a raccoon into this mix? and
right.
and then as the movie plays out, we see that, like, oh, that is like another, one of her
Multiverse.
personalities kind of like seeping in, and the ceramic, pot leaking a little bit. And it was one of those, like, watching it back the second time. Yeah, the first time, like, we have that cut over to Harry Shum Jr.'s character, you can see, like, underneath the hat, like, the raccoon tail in the background, but, like, it's a blink and you'll miss it kind of thing, and you would only think to look for it once you have seen him later in the movie with the
Hmm.
raccoon, like, driving him by his hair and stuff like that. And so that's just like a wildly funny thing. The fact that they actually got Randy Newman to come in and voice Raccacoonie, and then also like make a little Randy Newman Pixar-esque song about it, is just a fun little extra bit. Because Ratatouille obviously has no real Randy Newman involvement. He, like,
Yeah.
that's not a that doesn't have music in the way that Monsters Inc. did, or the Toy Story movies did at the
Or story.
time.
Yeah.
um but yeah, like there's so much fun to that running bit, as we go through the film, as like, and again, like, he's one that, when he shows up at the end and she knows exactly what to do with him to like help use him to get through some of those other people, is just a fun little, like, way of tying that all together. I'm looking through the credits, and they're the two fighters that are labeled in the credits: Alpha Jumper Trophy and Alpha Jumper Bigger Trophy. And just that whole sequence of the way to trigger these guys getting their abilities is going to be sticking those dildo-esque trophies on their butts,
Trophy.
um, is just like hilarious. And and to see them do this fight with those little things just kind of flopping out throughout the entire fight is just a ton of fun, and such
The
an absurd level of humor to it, but just like works.
I'm so glad that I saw the movie in a theater for that reason so much, because the audience reaction to it was so palpable and like visceral mixtures of like laughter and like disgust and shock, and yeah, it was so great. And it is part of why I love going to movies. And you know, not knowing how that fight was going to play out when she was trying to like hide it from him, and all of a sudden just somebody else coming out and just boom, and it just, it's excellent and it's so funny. And the way that Everything Everywhere All at Once is able to mix like humor in really dark moments or in really like emotionally heavy moments, and then just cut to the two of them are rocks falling down a hill together, right, or making things or getting chased by each other, or like literally anything involving the hot dog fingers.
Yeah.
Literally anything is like so weird, but also like really emotional and beautiful, and then like super funny. And the like the image of them like sticking their hot dog fingers in each other's mouths and like ketchup and mustard coming out. It's just like everything about it is like weird and funny, and it is such a, it feels like such a millennial sense of humor in its like comedic styling, and I really appreciate that because we don't get a lot of that, I feel like, in movies yet,
Hmm.
just due to our age. And it's great, it's funny, it is dark, it, yeah, it is, I like this idea now, it is like a perfectly millennial movie in so many ways, with our kind of like, you know, optimistic nihilism that defines so much of the millennial generation, I feel like. And that is all over Everything Everywhere All at Once. And you're constantly getting dark humor and hope and a healthy dose of nihilism, and the world's on fire and everything's going to end. And it just kind of spins it all around in a blender. It gives you this movie, and it is great. And it is routinely some of the funniest moments I've seen in a movie theater come from this film. And I would not have thought that based off the 30 minutes before this we talked about how dramatic and beautiful and lovely the film is, but it mixes its humor so well together.
Yeah.
Really, like, we haven't even talked about her at all, but so much of like Jamie Lee Curtis in this movie is fantastic as this, you know, stereotypical bureaucrat at like the IRS, and how much depth and humor is attached to her character, and how she has to kind of constantly like different versions of herself, and how she just kind of commits to the bit on all of them, right? As, like,
Hmm.
especially as a person who is, you know, probably certainly the biggest, actor actress in this movie from a Western perspective would be Jamie Lee Curtis, and she just she just gives her all to it. And how much like pathos she gives hot dog finger Jamie Lee Curtis, and
Hmm.
the like breakup and reconciliation and longing for Evelyn's character is like really lovely, actually. And you end up cheering for the two people who in pretty much every other multiverse are like antagonists to like end up together in hot dog fingerland. And it's great and it's beautiful and it's lovely. And her like playing the piano is like
Hmm.
such a weird funny scene, and it's just, yeah, this movie constantly balances its humor and drama so well together.
Yeah. The like even in a universe with hot dog fingers, we became really good with our feet. It is like
Yeah,
that is just yet another example of like how they introduce an idea as a complete
as
goof
a
and a
bit, yeah,
gag,
right,
but like like they keep coming back to it and turn it around and make it meaningful and make it
yeah.
heartfelt. Yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had. There. Speaking of Jamie Lee Curtis's and like in her environment, two things. One, like I love the the movie does kind of like, or she calls attention to and spotlights her like employee of the month trophy, which is
Yeah,
one of the ones that obviously then gets later thrown up somebody's butt. Um,
sure.
but then also the realization that like when she becomes like a child of the bagel or whatever in that universe, and in many of those other universes, the realization that I had on a rewatch of she has taken that like karaoke receipt that she circled on and stapled that to her face, and that's the bagel on her head. Is like oh, that's a like this movie is just using everything it has
Mhm,
to
mhm.
its advantage. Like nothing is wasted. Um, in addition, I wanted to shout out again, just in a fun, creative move of combat. the sign spinning turning into like the
Mm,
shield flipping to take out all those enemies and stuff like that. It's this idea of just like a even a job, a position, a skill set that like many people, we drive by all the time and most people just probably don't give a second thought to or something like that.
yeah,
Like there is an artistry there for the people that like get really into that thing. I've definitely seen like plenty that are just out there and they're just standing there like
yeah.
waggling the sign while they're on their phone with the other hand or something like that. But the ones who get like really into it and really crazy about it, seeing how that could like turn into and it just seems like it also fits in with like the aesthetic and the style that the Daniels are interested in. It is like taking those overlooked the misfit toys, the island of misfit toys, and figuring out how those would work together in a cool and interesting way to have an interesting fight sequence or something like that. I mean, earlier, obviously, the one of the big first ones we get is of course Wayland with the fanny pack fight against the security guards is just a ton of fun. And so yeah, like I love all of the action in this just because of how like fun and inventive it is compared to, you know, like I won't say the MCU never does anything like cool and inventive, but like
Right.
for the amount of movies that they've had and the amount of action scenes they've had, so many of them
Mhm.
have just at this point especially become like CG spot fests or whatever. So to
Right.
see like practical physical like choreography elements to these
Mm,
fights, both in the action itself and how they're shot, is such a joy. And like there's almost an element of me that I would love to see what these guys did with would do with like a Shang-Chi 2 or something like that, like how
mm,
the kind of like cool, especially especially because they can clearly also play in the multiverse or whatever. Like I would almost love to see what they could do with an MCU scale, but I wouldn't want it to. I would still want them to be able to be making their movie a la like a Taika Waititi,
mhm.
as opposed to kind of having to be forced into the
A
broader
certain box.
MCU mold
Okay.
or something like that. But
Right.
yeah, so much
Agreed.
so much fun there, so such a joy,
Yes.
and yeah, like it's something that like everybody will take away different things, and I think you and I obviously
Yeah.
like take away a lot from the heartfelt and the emotional and the pathos of this film, but like there is just such incredible humor to it as well that they're
It's so
definitely
funny.
not, not everything's going to hit for everybody.
Right.
But I'll be damned if seeing Jenny Slate throw a corgi into a fridge doesn't make me chuckle.
Right. And her reaction. I think, the last thing I'll say is that I think that's really beautifully said in terms of like I think there is something in this movie for literally everyone who watches it. And even if you don't love it, I think there's some lesson, something that you can get out of this film. And I encourage everyone to go watch it. I think it is one of those films, one of those works of art that just has so many things to contribute and say and make an impact, right? And this is such an easy movie that like I can see people saying like that movie changed my life kind of thing. It's such an obvious, you know, entry into that list, and I think it is an incredible film. And there are a lot of dramedies I think out there, but I think few balance as intense elements of comedy and drama as well as everything everywhere all at once, especially almost simultaneously being a comedy and drama. And like you said, the pathos I think of the film and the heart. Again, it is a millennial ass movie, and as a proud representative of that generation, I love to see something like this happen, and it is an incredible film.
Yeah, I don't know which way the Academy will go with it or anything like that because they typically don't lean into sci-fi in this way, I think. But I would love to see Michelle Yeoh get up there, get like a Best
Oh,
Actress nomination. Stephanie Sue, I think, Best Supporting Actress. Jamie Lee Curtis, also Best Supporting Actress, and Ke Huy Quan. I don't
Ke
know
Huy
if I'd
Quan
put him
in
in.
particular,
Yeah,
I
I don't
feel
know if
like
I'd put him
best
in Best
supporting
Actor
actor
or
for like
Best Supporting Actor, but yeah, I would love to see him.
absolutely his performance in particular is maybe my favorite because of how I think varied, but also at their heart the same person each of his characters are, right? Like
Hmm.
he's the person who sometimes he's playing so many different people, but are all really the same person. Whereas I think Joy is playing very different kinds of people,
Yeah.
and I think Evelyn's playing very different kinds of person. And I like the idea that he's essentially at this like at the end of the day, like he is still the same kind of person. He's just a good-hearted dude who just
Hmm.
wants people to be happy that he cares about in his life. And I think we talked about this off air, but like he in so many ways is the emotional heart of this film, and the couple big speeches in particular he gives absolutely crush you. They're so heartbreaking and also really, really, really uplifting at the same time for the impact they have. Yeah, him in particular, especially after such a long absence, he absolutely did some sort of recognition. It's incredible.
Yeah. I love, because he's the one that we get this the most from, is like when it is Alpha Wayland versus, like, that universe's Wayland, like, just from, like, before he says anything, just how he holds himself or how he has a look in
Hmm.
his eye,
Hmm.
exactly which one we're talking to, and
Yeah,
that's, like, also, I think, a really, subtle but impressive,
bit
element
of
to
acting.
him as well.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
so yeah, I like, in addition to, like, I hope it wins, like, awards for effects and writing and cinematography and stuff like that. I hope it, like, when the year is done, I hope that, like, it doesn't get forgotten in award
Yeah,
season.
yeah,
Cuz yeah, there's a lot of fun special stuff in there.
agreed.
Um so yeah. Trying to think, was there anything else I had that I wanted to give a shout out to? I think there was like one other thought, but it is escaping me now. So I will go ahead and leave it at that. But yeah, just real good stuff. Shout out
Yeah.
to Everything Everywhere All at Once. Oh, this is what it was. We talked about it a little bit, but I also, like, I love the audacity the movie has with everything else that happens in this movie to just show us rocks on a mountainside
Yeah.
in silence,
Mhm.
and we just get, like, an entire scene that is just text. um
One of the
uh
most important scenes of the movie too, to be
yeah,
clear.
yeah. And it's just like it it grinds, like, the frenetic energy of the movie to a halt,
Mhm.
which in turn says, this is an important thing that you should pay attention to, so read what's up here on the screen.
Catch
um
your breath, right,
Yeah.
and stuff,
Yeah.
yeah.
And, in my screening, that was another one of those moments that, like, there's a lot of humor in what's up there on the screen, and it is just, like, audience, like, reading it at their own pace kinda thing, so it was, like, this weird, like, trickle of laughter as people were seeing what happened and stuff like that, and it's just, like, it's just another one of those, like, really cool, bold moments, in this movie, I think, that, I like, felt refreshing as a result. It was a deliberate, like, we recently talked about on that D Plus show, like, how Deadpool's pacing is all over the place.
Mm,
And this movie has incredible pacing as it's throwing everything at the wall at you. And then
yeah.
it is very deliberate when it says, like, we're going to bring
Comes
the
to a
pace to a
halt.
halt right now to focus on this moment, on this relationship between Joy and her mother, without a word being said. You are going to see what they're saying through the sentiment, that they can somehow convey telepathically as rocks. I don't know what's going on there, but like, it doesn't matter the mechanics of it. You're going to get this conversation between them, because there's like. I had this thought of, like, asking what's your favorite, multiverse in this, because I'm also thinking about, like, how, like, we only get a couple glimpses of it, but, like, the multiverse where they're both just pinatas is, like,
Yeah,
another, just like, what a fun little idea,
right.
especially also off of the heels of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where, like, so many of those multiverses are just, like, shades of the same thing, and admittedly, a lot of the multiverses in here are shades of the same thing, but, like, the paint universe that they go through is, like, that's something I would love to see more of. The In this
Mhm.
case, the pinata universe is, like, that's a fascinating element. And so just, like, they have. so much fun with it must have just been fun writing that movie of like like let's throw 20 ideas at the wall and use 10 of them instead of like let's use the one that I think we like will land on. It's like we'll use 10 of them and
Use half.
like they'll just be like, glimpses in this montage as they fight through, a multiverse or something like that. But yeah, so many cool ideas. But yeah, that the rocks moment in particular, which obviously then comes back in a big way with the googly eyes and I'm gonna get you as they slide down the mountain stuff, is such a ingenious
Mhm.
way to like draw attention to here's our big central ideas and heartfelt moments.
Yeah.
We've overloaded you with so much stuff, so we're going to strip all of that away so that this is
Right.
all you have to focus on right now. And they just do a really good job with how they structure that. So shout out
Agreed.
to that moment in particular.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts on Everything Everywhere All at Once, Logan?
I think it's fantastic. I think everyone should go watch it. I think it's beautiful. I think it's funny. I think Michelle Yeoh is fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. And yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Everyone go check it out. Go give it all the awards.
Alrighty. Then I will leave it to you, Logan. Do you want to take some time to chat about
We can
RRR, or do you want to call it there for a
we can
night for the night?
we can call it there for that. We can do an RR special later on.
Okay, I'll
I
I'll
got a
have to.
Netflix password for you.
There we go. Yeah. Or well, there's a possibility of Cam and I sharing accounts in the near future. So maybe we'll figure out how to divide and conquer some stuff there too.
Yeah, perfect.
Um, all right. Well, yes. Then that will wrap up this week's episode. Thank you, Logan, for joining me to
Always,
share our extended thoughts on Everything Everywhere All at Once.
always a pleasure.
Easily going to be in my top 10 for the year, if not my number
Same,
one.
same.
Definite highlight of this year and the last number of years. There, you mentioned like
Yeah.
people kind of really gushing about this movie, and I've definitely heard a few people describe it in the vein of like I think it was Matt Batson, I think, when he did they did like a special kind of funny episode of Screencast with this or something, and he basically talked about the idea of like realizing this might be his favorite movie as he was watching it, um
Mm, mhm.
and what a strange sensation that is. So yeah, shout out to the people who are really getting behind this movie and really loving it in all those fun ways. Let us go around our metaphorical table with any plugs we might have. You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie or Lefty Loggy, Logggy. Anything you want to give a shout out to there, Logan?
I would give a shout out to last week's episode of that D Plus show. Yeah, I always have to do like the mental math where we are in the timeline. But yeah, that last week's episode of that D Plus show where we did Deadpool with myself, Cameron, and Trevor. It was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed the conversation, if not the movie as much. The movie's still okay. And then I also encourage everyone to go check out, like you mentioned at the top of the show, Cameron's winding down. Still probably like 2 months left. Like you said, Friday night, Dying Lights. It's been really fun seeing him do this project for by the time it comes to fruition, probably 6, 7 months, if not longer. So I encourage everyone to go check him out and kind of cheer him on as his journey comes to a close.
Yep. You follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I will echo those. I will also shout out our Let's Plays every Tuesday and Thursday on youtube.com/thatnerdysite. What do we have for this week? This week, one of them is As Dusk Falls.
Hell yeah.
And I don't remember what the other one is. So let me pull up our YouTube page because I've definitely already got them like uploaded and ready to go. So let us see. One is As Dusk Falls, and the other is going to be Live Alive. That's right. So yeah, Live Alive is going to go up on Tuesday, and As Dusk Falls is going to be our Thursday episode. And I'm already planning on recording the ones for the following week after that. So yeah. go check out new Let's Plays from us every Tuesday and Thursday on YouTube, as well as all of our fun podcasts. We got this one, we got That D Plus Show, we got That News You Care About. Basically, something for you every day, Monday through Friday, over on youtube.com/thatnerdysite, and half those days on podcast services around the globe for our various podcasts.
Absolutely.
You follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, or go to thatnerdysite.com for all the latest from us. We do post everything to the website as well. If you liked what you heard, once again, please rate, review, like, subscribe, share the podcast with your friends, all that fun stuff. Let us know what your thoughts of Everything Everywhere All at Once were. Thank you for listening. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.